This is going to be a very casual and low-key episode because we're just going to solve one of the fundamental problems of human existence. We are now at the last of the three plays of Aeschylus Oresteia. This is 458 BC. We've been tracking this trilogy masterwork, really, of three plays that were performed at the city Dionysia. And we've been tracking it in terms of this question about blood guilt, right? That human life wraps us up into this kind of cycle of history and recrimination that we are currently kind of on the brink of again, right? I mean, this is something that we thought that we had kind of settled in this country and in the West more generally, that we do not punish the sons for the sins of the father. But now, more and more people are starting to kind of go back into these old ways, these primal attitudes, these ancient attitudes that, you need to punish the next generation for what happened in the past. Those attitudes are now resurfacing. And so it seemed like a good time to take a look at one of the West's great solutions to this problem. And I think it's really contained in this play. And I'm going to talk today about how the cycle of blood guilt gets resolved in a way that does not involve, say, reparations, right, which is what we're currently talking about, or other nastier things, right, ways of working out past conflict with punishment in the present, but instead basically ends this cycle of violence. I'm going to look at how that happens in the Oresteia, and then I'm going to talk about the legacy of that idea throughout history. And I'm finally going to talk about why the Greek answer kind of poses this new problem, which is kind of resolved by Christ's sacrifice on the cross. So like I say, a very, very low-key, small episode, no big themes going on here. Right after I finish filming this, I am going to move into the new house that I am buying. And one thing I know I am bringing is all of my public goods stuff because it looks so good in my kitchen, in my bathroom, wherever. This is an incredible online store where you can get stuff that is healthy and good for you. It has none of the weird, gross additives that you have to worry about when you're just like in the grocery store or whatever. They sell a bunch of basics, toilet paper, shampoo. I personally love their nuts. They have cashews and almonds and chocolate-covered almonds. My cat, Chad Cat, loves their freeze-dried duck nibs. So Public Goods comes Chad Cat approved. And here is the best part. They have worked out this incredible deal with me where if you are a Young Heretics listener, you can get $15 off your first Public Goods order with no minimum purchase. That means I am just giving you free stuff. Here's what happens. Go to publicgoods.com/heretics, publicgoods.com/heretics, or use the code heretics at checkout, and you will get $15 off your first order of anything you want from the store. publicgoods.com/heretics. So just to recap us, right, we've had the Agamemnon, which tells the story about Agamemnon coming home from Troy and getting murdered by his wife, Clytemnestra, and her adulterous lover, Aegisthus. There are a number of reasons why they do that, but, one of the main ones that I talked about was the sacrifice of Iphigenia. There's this long cycle going way back before Agamemnon and Clytemnestra of child sacrifice, of child murder, and basically the house of Atreus is just cursed to kind of live this thing out. Then in the Libation Bearers, which is the second play, Orestes, Agamemnon's son, comes home and avenges himself by killing Clytemnestra. And we talked about how, unlike Clytemnestra, who basically gets just wrapped up into this cycle of violence, that she kind of totally goes all in for it and just relishes the blood and sort of lets it turn her into a monster, Orestes has this idea that he should be appealing to something higher, to some standard outside of his family, because his family is all implicated in this terrible tragedy, in this ugly curse, right? And so he does a lot of praying to the gods and to Zeus, but he also has this kind of patron deity of Apollo. And by the end of that play, he thinks, followed the will of the gods to killing his mother, except that he sees the furies, the avenging goddesses, coming back to haunt him. And that's going to be the subject of this third play, the Eumenides. And the Eumenides has a chorus of furies, of kind of demon goddesses who, just punish and recriminate and bring up these past wrongs. They're almost the spirit of everything we've been talking about, right? Of this cycle of guilt. You never escape. You never escape from generation to generation. You're just just guilty. And the Furies are kind of like Clytemnestra's curse upon Orestes. And that's where we begin in this last of the three tragedies, which is really an incredible setup, right? And the question is going to become, how is Orestes, whom we admire and like, right? But how is he going to break free of this net? He's got Apollo to maybe kind of help him, but Apollo seems to have also sort of led him into this in the first place. And so that's the setup. And I'm going to read to you now just the opening from Robert Fagel's translation, the Penguin Classics edition, in which the Pythia, who is the priestess of Apollo, explains the situation. And this whole play takes place in two places. First, in the shrine of Apollo at Delphi, and then we move to Athens to the shrine of Athena. And I'm going to talk about that transition in a second, but first, here's the opener. This is what's called the prologue. First of the gods I honor in my prayer, says Pythia, is Mother Earth, the first of the gods to prophecy, and next I praise tradition, second to hold her mother's mantic seat. So legend says, and third by the lots of destiny, by tradition's free will, no force to break her down. Another Titan, child of the earth, took her seat, and Phoebe passed it on as a birthday gift to Phoebus. Phoebus a name for clear, pure light delivered from hers, leaving the marsh and razorback of Delos, landing at palace headlands flocked by ships. Here he came to make his home Parnassus and the heights, and an escort filled with reverence brought him on. The highway builders, sons of the god of fire, who tamed the savage country, civilized the wilds. On he marched, and the people lined his way to cover him with praise, led by Delphos, Lord, helm of the land, and Zeus inspired his mind with the prophet's skill, with Godhead, made him fourth in the dynasty of seers to mount this throne. But it is Zeus that Apollo speaks for, Father Zeus. These I honor in the prelude of my prayers, these gods. But Athena, at the forefront of the temple, crowns our legends. I revere the nymphs who keep the Corcyraean rocks deep hollows, loving haunt of birds where the spirits drift and hover, and great Dionysus rules the land. I never forget that day he marshaled his wild women in arms. He was all God. He ripped Pentheus down like a hare in the nets of doom, and the rushing springs of Pleistos, Poseidon's force I call, and the king of the sky, the king of all fulfillment, Zeus. Now the prophet goes to take her seat. God, speed me, grant me a vision greater than all my embarkations past. So this is almost like a little compressed version of like Hesiod's Theogony. So Hesiod, we haven't talked that much about on the show, although we will. He's sort of the counterpart in Greek, in the Greek literary mentality to Homer, this kind of ancient epic poet, archaic epic poet. And the Theogony is like this long tale of all the gods and how they were born. Right at the outset, we know that we are having to ascend to the highest heights of Greek civilization and theology and belief to work this problem out, right? We're invoking not only Apollo, but Zeus, right, who kind of inspires Apollo or Apollo speaks through Apollo in some ways. And we should remember, right, that this is not like mere pagan superstition. At this point in Athenian culture and in Greek-speaking culture more generally, there was plenty of speculation about whether the gods were just metaphors, whether they were all kind of expressions of one divine logos, and that would continue onward, right? So this is in some ways, it's kind of Aeschylus, using the dramatic, literary, mythological version of a conversation that was going on all throughout Greece, which is, what do the gods want and what is justice? And so then the Pythia turns to us essentially and says, where are the Greeks among you? Draw your lots and enter. It is the custom here. I will tell the future. Only as the god will lead the way. So this is a remarkable moment. She turns to the audience, right, and says, you Greeks, this is about you as well. And so suddenly it's revealed to us that this story, which seems like a kind of mythic tale from the distant past, is actually about us and how are we going to organize our lives and how are we going to seek justice. She says, terrors to tell, terrors all can see. They send me reeling back from Apollo's house. The strength drains. It's very hard to stand, crawling on all fours, no spring in the legs. An old woman gripped by fear is nothing. A child, nothing more. I'm on my way to the vault. It's green with wreaths, and there at the navel stone I see a man, an abomination to God. He holds the seat where suppliants sit for purging, his hands dripping blood, and his sword just drawn, and he holds a branch. It must have topped an olive, wreathed with a fine tuft of wool, all piety, fleece gleaming white. So far it's clear, I tell you, but there in a ring around the man, an amazing company, Women sleeping, nestling against the benches. Women? No, Gorgons I'd call them. But then with Gorgons you'd see the grim, inhuman. I saw a picture years ago, the creatures tearing the feast away from Phineus. These have no wings. I looked, but black they are, and so repulsive. Their heavy, rasping breathing makes me cringe, and their eyes ooze a discharge, sickening, and what they wear to flaunt that at the gods, the idols, sacrilege. Even in the homes of men, the tribe that produced that brood I never saw, or a plot of ground to boast it nursed their kind without some tears, some pain for all its labor. Now for the outcome. This is his concern, Apollo, the master of this house, the mighty power, healer, prophet, diviner of signs. He purges the halls of others. He must purge his own. So we have this kind of panning in almost. We kind of set the scope of the cosmic story, which is the story of the gods and seeking their will, right, and their justice. And then we have ourselves wrapped up into it. She turns to us and says, "You are involved in this too." And now we zero in back on the story, right? We return to Orestes, who is making supplication for purification. He wants to be purified of this murder that he has committed. But he is surrounded by the Furies. And the Furies are one of the most striking choruses in all of Greek drama, Greek tragedy. Remember that up to this point, we've had choruses of human beings. In the Agamemnon, we had the chorus of elders who had been left behind when the Greeks went to Troy. In the Libation Bearers, we had the chorus of servant women. And now, suddenly, everything is very, very different. And these Furies speak to us of the thing that we together on this show have been tracking throughout this whole trilogy, and that is what it is to let yourself completely be abandoned to the logic of recrimination and guilt. So the next thing I'm going to read is their first ode, the first time they really reveal themselves to us. This is an interaction between the Furies and the ghost of Clytemnestra, who, remember, is kind of on their side. And they, in sleep, have lost Orestes. So Orestes has gone off with Apollo, and this is their lament that they have lost him. They say, "The miles of pain, the pain I suffer, and all for nothing, all for pain, more pain, the anguish, oh, the grief too much to bear. The quarries slipped from the nets, our quarry lost and gone. Sleep defeats me, I have lost the prey. You, child of Zeus, you, a common thief," this is Apollo they're talking to, "young god, you have ridden down the powers proud with age. You worship the suppliant, the godless man who tears his parent's heart. The matricide, you steal him away, and you a god, guilt both ways, and who can call it justice? Not I, her charges stalk my dreams. Yes, the charioteer rides hard. He spurs, digging the vitals under the heart, under the heaving breast. I can feel the executioner's lash. It's searing deeper, sharper, the knives of burning ice. Okay, so this is why that genealogy of the gods, or that taxonomy of the gods that we had at the beginning is important, right? Is that we see that Apollo and the Olympian gods represent something actually different from these kind of darker, deeper, in some senses more atavistic forces that the Furies represent, right? Remember that in Greek mythology, you have kind of like the Titans, and you have these pre-Olympian gods who are sort of more chaotic. They represent forces of chaos and of darkness and unknowing that are beyond human civilization. And then the Olympians are kind of the patrons of humanity and of civilization and of order, right? And so the Furies, I mean, I love this line, "The miles of pain, the pain I suffer, and all for nothing, all for pain, more pain," right? They're just this force, right? This force of revenge and suffering. And the thing that they hate most is the idea that that chain might be broken. They're furious because Apollo has sort of opened up this way for Orestes maybe to be rid of and cleansed of his stain, or his miasma is the Greek word for it, right? And this is really, this kind of powerful setup, and it expresses something core to Greek mythology, which is this idea that the universe itself, right, is kind of beyond our knowing and has these forces of chaos and darkness in it, which the Olympian gods, and therefore, right, human beings and human civilization, we have to kind of step in, right, and give shape and order using our logos, using our reason, using our rational faculties, to figure out some way of bringing these chaotic forces to heel and bringing them into line. When you get down to it, it's a remarkably dark and nihilistic. I think Nietzsche captures this well when we talked about the birth of tragedy, right? It's a remarkably dark vision of the universe as a whole. And it's part of why tragedy is so compelling, right? Is because it often kind of posits that we live in this universe that is cold and dark and unfeeling. And even our gods, right? Even the forces that are on our side, like reason and civilization, right? Those forces are having to contend with this kind of vast expanse of darkness and unknowing. And they're bringing this, they're muscling it all essentially into shape. I am so delighted to talk to you about The Spectator. It's been one of my favorite publications for a long time in a world where so many different magazines and journals and newspapers are getting captured by cancel culture and political ideology. The Spectator is bigger than politics. They're not right-wing or left-wing. They're just fascinating and always informative to read. If you sign up today, you'll get 3 free months of both print and digital magazine, plus a free Spectator hat, which will make me super jealous because I've always loved these guys. Use the offer code HERETICS, like in the title, HERETICS, at checkout. Go to spectatorworld.com/special offer and use the offer code HERETICS. You'll be able to read some of the best names out there, some of them pals of mine whom I respect immensely: Douglas Murray, Christopher Caldwell, Chadwick Moore, and plenty of others. So use the offer code HERETICS when you go to spectatorworld.com/special offer to get 3 free months and a free hat. Okay, so Apollo beats back the Furies with his divine bow. He comes out, they have a remarkable confrontation, an act of stickomythia, which is the line by line, they go back and forth with lines for a while. And then finally it ends up that this conflict between them, right? Apollo kind of as the representative of cleansing Orestes, purifying him of his stain, and the Furies who simply demand blood for blood, right? They reach this kind of impasse and they decide that they're going to appeal to Athena. And the scene changes to the Acropolis at Athens, and to Athena's shrine. So that, this is the kind of, they're appealing essentially to a goddess of wisdom that is like outside of this whole thing, like an arbitrator. Here's what the Furies have to say when they find him doing that. They say, there he is, clutching the knees of power once again, twined in the deathless goddess idol. Look, he wants to go on trial for his crimes. Never. The mother's blood that wets the ground. You can never bring it back, dear God. The earth drinks and the running life is gone. No, you'll give me blood for blood. You must. Out of your living marrow I will drain my red libation. Out of your veins I suck my food, my raw, brutal cups. Wither you alive, drag you down, and there you pay. Agony for mother-killing agony. And there you will see them all. Every mortal who outraged God or guest or loving parent, each receives the pains his pains exact. A mighty God is Hades. There at the last reckoning underneath the earth, he scans all, he squares all men's accounts and graves them on the tablets of his mind. And so the Furies are saying basically to Athena, to Orestes, to Apollo, you can't bring Clytemnestra back. No matter what judgment you give, no matter what absolution you provide, no matter how carefully you argue this court case, the loss of that life is irrevocable. The blood drinks and demands blood for blood. That's their logic. And that is a logic which has a certain force to it. It shouldn't be, like, the Furies are disgusting and evil and hideous, but one of the reasons they're so terrifying is that they actually express something real about the tragedy of living in history, right? That in fact, there is no undoing. There is no going back and unmaking the wrongs of the past. They do have an effect on us. We are born, into a web of cause and effect. And we can't change our circumstances into which we're born. We can't change our genetics, all of these things that kind of lock us in to a world that is already broken, right? And this is one of the central reasons why Christians talk about the world in terms of brokenness, right? That the world is already, and we are already broken before we set foot on it. And there's this call, right, from the Furies to acknowledge that. And it's the same call you hear now, right? We've spilled untold amounts of blood, right, in the cause of ending slavery. The Civil War exacted a hideous set of casualties that Lincoln described, right, as in some sense God's judgment upon us for the horrible sin of slavery. And yet we still can't get out of this like recrimination of one another, that we need to pay money, we need to pay treasure. Just when I was recording this, Jennifer Rubin, who's, it's hard to hate her because she's just such an idiot, but she's a person that, has gone completely insane post-Trump. And, this study came out that according to the census, America's white population decreased for the first time. And Rubin said, this is great. We can't, this is fabulous news. Presumably, she thinks that she's celebrating diversity, but really what she's celebrating is like mass deaths and addiction on the part of white people, right? And so like the logic of this, the logic that, whiteness makes you guilty, that your ancestry, that your history makes you guilty, even if you don't think you're an evil person, right? The minute you buy into this logic, it will eventually play its way out to its conclusion, which is just blood, and more blood. It's the same logic as slavery's logic, right? Slavery's logic was that you belong to another person because of your race, because of the color of your skin. The logic of critical race theory, the logic of reparations, the logic of all this stuff is the same. It's that white people, right, belong to a category of oppressor because of their birth. And it's the logic of the furies, right? This dark, evil idea that the fact of wrong in history means that you must suffer for the sins of all, right? This play is about doing away with that idea, and that's what now begins to happen. So Orestes makes his appeal to Athena. He says, I have suffered into truth. That's a very Greek idea, right? That suffering brings wisdom. I have suffered into truth. Well, I know the countless arts of purging, where to speak, where silence is the rule. In this ordeal, a compelling master urges me to speak. The blood seeps. It is fading on my hands, the stain of mother's murder washing clean. It was still fresh at the god's hearth. Apollo killed the swine and the purges drove it off. Mine is a long story. If I'd start with the many hosts I met, I lived with, and I left them all unharmed. Time refines all things that age with time. And now with the pure, reverent lips, I call the queen of the land. So he's saying, I've gone through a ritual expurgation. What more can you ask of me? Time, this is the alternative, right? This is the civilization building version of dealing with this, which is that time does absolve us. And that, once we make the ritual ablution, then we can move forward. That's what Orestes is proposing. He says, now with pure, reverent lips, I call the queen of the land. Athena, help me. Come without your spear, without a battle you will win myself, my land, the Argive people, true and just, your friends in arms forever. Where are you now, the scorching wilds of Libya, bathed by the Triton pool where you were born, robes shrouding your feet or shod in the march to aid allies, or striding the giant's plain, marshal of armies, hero scanning, flashing through the ranks, come, you can hear me from afar, you are a god, set me free from this. This is the appeal, right? Is that now we need some kind of final adjudication to put this thing to rest forever. And the rest of the play, Athena appears. There is a trial between the Furies and Apollo, right? Apollo defends Orestes, the Furies accuse him, and Athena has to make her decree. Guys, if you do not want to look like a schlub, there is one place that I think you should go, and that is Mini Moustachery. I love these dudes. Long before they were sponsors of the show, I was buying their stuff, and so now I am super, super stoked to be representing them to you. They have everything you could possibly need for high-end men's grooming. It's easy to get suckered into like Instagram ads where they just have this one thing and it's not that good. Mini Moustachery has it all, and it's all high quality. Combs, brushes, shampoos, beard wax, all that stuff. You need it all if you want to have a glorious, resplendent beard, as of course you should, or even if you just want to be clean shaven and not scraggly and gross. I am really excited to try. They now have a beard mask, which is like face mask, but for your beard. I bought some face masks once, and then I was like, oh no, I have a beard, I can't use these. So finally, Mini Moustachery has me covered like they do for everything else. If you go to minimoustachery.com/heretics, it's minimoustachery.com/heretics, you will get 25% off your purchase with the offer code heretics at checkout. This stuff is incredible. Go fix your face. Okay, here is Athena's declaration, her verdict, which will hold, as she is going to say, right, for all of us. Remember that this is about all of us too and how we're going to deal with this. She says, And now, if you would hear my law, you men of Greece, you who will judge the first trial of bloodshed, now and forevermore, for Aegeus people, this will be the court where judges reign. This is the crag of Ares, the Areopagus, right, where Paul would confront the Stoics and all that. This is the crag of Ares, where the Amazons pitched their tents when they came marching down on Theseus, full tilt in their fury, erecting a new city to overarch his city, towers thrust against his towers. They sacrificed to Ares, named this rock from that day onward Ares Crag. And so Athena is essentially claiming Athens as the seat of justice and the seat of where this conflict is going to be resolved. Here from the heights, terror and reverence, my people's kindred powers will hold them from injustice through the day and through the mild night. Never pollute our law with innovations. No, my citizens, foul a clear well and you will suffer thirst. Neither anarchy nor tyranny, my people. Worship the mean, I urge you. That's an idea that, of course, is going to become formalized in Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, right? That we're trying to chart a reasonable path between extremes, right? Worship the mean, I urge you. Shore it up with reverence and never banish terror from the gates, not outright. Where is the righteous man who knows no fear? The stronger your fear, your reverence for the just, the stronger your country's wall and city's safety, stronger by far than all men else possess, in Scythia's rugged steppes or Pelops' level plain, untouched by lust for spoil, this court of law, majestic, swift to fury, rising above you as you sleep, our night watch always wakeful, guardian of our land. I found it here and now. So I urge you, Athens, I have drawn this out to rouse you to your future. You must rise. Each man must cast his lot and judge the case, reverent to his oath. Now I have finished. So this is what is called an etiology. Now, an etia in Greek is a word meaning cause or origin, right? And so the logos is the account or the reason or the whatever, right? So anything ology is the study of that thing. An etiology is a story, sometimes mythical, sometimes not, about how a thing came to be. And the institution of the law courts, which was central to Athenian life, right, is being etiologized here. That is, we're telling a story about how it came into being. And the idea is that we needed somebody from outside. There needed to be objectivity. And so we needed to create an institution founded upon reverence for justice, which is impartial, which takes no side and simply listens, right? That judges exist, right? Who listen. Now, this is not like a foolproof system. People are people, right? We can't escape our humanity. We can't escape, and we're going to see that in just a second, right? We can't escape the fact that human beings are flawed and can be fickle, right? But what Athena is identifying is that up until now, right, in this tribal warfare, it's the people who are implicated in their own wrongdoing who were making the judgment, right? And so essentially she's saying you have no standing to make this judgment. You furies, right, who are essentially just the spirit of bloodshed, and even you Orestes, right, who are wrapped up, as he himself knows, right, who are wrapped up in this history, this curse, right? You need somebody from outside to make a judgment, and once that judgment is made, it's put to rest forever. That's the key, right? Is that this establishment, right, which sounds so basic to us because of course there are courts of law, right? This is like a story of the invention of that idea and the intervention of that idea into what is otherwise a history, an endless human history of just constant recrimination and murder and tribal feud and tribal warfare. We see this, right? We see that when there aren't robust court systems, robust institutions of justice, right? That people just get wrapped up in their infighting forever and ever and ever. And tribal feuds are like this. They go on. I mean, this is the Hatfields and the McCoys, right? These families that have been fighting forever. They don't know why anymore. They just fight, right? All of this is like, well attested in the history of humanity. And it's not something that just goes away. It's something that exists wherever the light of objective justice doesn't shine, right? And so making that pronunciation and having somebody from outside evaluate the case and decide according to rules what's going to happen, right, is the alternative to this thing. So she invites the Athenians to cast their lots. She casts what turns out to be a tie-breaking vote for Orestes, and she does this essentially out of a certain personal affection. I will cast my lot for you, she says. No mother gave me birth. I honor the male in all things but marriage. Yes, with all my heart I am my father's child. So we see that there are personal attachments involved in this process too. It's not perfect. It has some refining to go. But essentially, right, she's saying, judge you Athenians for yourselves what will become of this situation. And basically, the equally cast lots suggest, right, that these are two forces that pull us in two directions, in the direction of recrimination or the direction of justice and putting an end to blood guilt. Athena puts an end to it. The man goes free, cleared of the charge of blood. The lots are equal. But as you may imagine, this does not satisfy the Furies. And so the next question of the play is, what will happen to them? Here they are. You younger gods, you have ridden down the ancient laws, wrenched them from my grasp, and I, robbed of my birthright, suffering, great with wrath, I loose my poison over the soil. Poison to match my grief comes pouring out my heart, cursing the land to burn it sterile, and now rising up from its roots, a cancer-blasting leaf and child. Now for justice, justice, cross the face of the earth, the bloody tide comes hurling, all mankind destroyed. So this is the natural reaction, right, of the spirit of recrimination, the spirit of blood guilt, when an end is put to the cycle of violence and retribution. Athena, yield to me, no more heavy spirits. You were not defeated. The vote was tied, a verdict fairly reached, with no disgrace to you. No, Zeus brought luminous proof before us. He who spoke God's oracle, he bore witness that Orestes did the work, but should not suffer harm. And now you'd vent your anger, hurt the land. Consider a moment, calm yourself. Never render us barren, raining your potent showers down like spears, consuming every seed. By all my rights, I promise you, your seat in the depths of the earth, yours by all rights, stationed at hearths, equipped with glistening thrones, covered with praise, my people will revere you. So she's basically offering a deal here to the Furies. She's saying, do you know what? You got beat fair and square. And she's appealing to something that the Furies are not really here to listen to. And that is this idea that, like, you know, even if you lose, you can trust in the process, right? You can trust in the courts, you can trust in the righteousness of this situation. But she offers them something in return. She says, you are a force to be reckoned with. There's no dishonor to you in this. And the reality of history, the reality of guilt, right? The reality of blood and pain and anguish, like, none of those are things that we can wish away. They're just things that we are going to make a conscious decision not to be consumed by. And so instead of being consumed and ended by the Furies, we're going to put them under the earth, right? They're going to live under the earth, and we will regard this sort of ancient atavistic spirit with a kind of horror and reverence and worship, which is what any divinity wants. The Furies still aren't persuaded until finally Athena says, no, I will never tire of telling you your gifts, so that you, the older gods, can never say that I, a young god, and the mortals of the city drove you outcast, outlawed from the land. But if you have any reverence for persuasion, the majesty of persuasion, the spell of my voice that would appease your fury, oh, please stay. And if you refuse to stay, it would be wrong, unjust to afflict this city with wrath, hatred, populations routed. Look, it is all yours, a royal share of our land, justly entitled, glorified forever. The leader of the Furies says, Queen Athena, where is the home you say is mine to hold? Athena, where all the pain and anguish end. Accept it. Leader, and if I do, what honor waits for me? Athena, no house can thrive without you. Leader, you would do that. Grant me that much power. Athena, whoever reveres us, we will raise the fortunes of their lives. Leader, you will pledge me that for all time to come? Athena, yes. I must never promise things I cannot do. Leader, your magic is working. I can feel the hate, the fury slip away. Athena, at last, and now take root in the land and win yourself new friends. So this is how the Furies are transformed into the Eumenides, and they become benevolent goddesses under the earth, chthonic goddesses, you might say. Chthonic is a word meaning of the earth or in the earth. It's persuasion that does it. right? The magic of Athena's voice. And this is the parable, the tale of how persuasion and logic and argued reasoning and finally a court of justice came to take the place of atavistic blood guilt, not because we don't recognize the power of history and of guilt, but because at a certain point we must put an end to it. And so they are essentially kind of, the word we would use now is sublimated, right? They live now under the earth. We must pay respect to them, but we must not live by their ancient laws. The idea that this is the cost of justice, right? Because remember that, again, this is an imperfect system. It involves human beings who are themselves flawed and broken, but they are striving towards something higher, as represented by the Olympian gods and by logos, right, by reason. It's an imperfect system, and there has always been an idea ever since in human history, in Western history, that this exacts a cost. It's almost like there is a remainder or an excess product left over from this chemical reaction that happens, right? You create the law courts, you put an end to recrimination, you put an end to blood guilt, and you live by reason. But the old ancient gods remain. They remain under the earth. And I'm going to read to you now a couple parables from totally different sources, which express this angst, this anxiety that we have, that somewhere on the edges of our vision or underneath our civilized society, the furies still wait to come back, right? This is the kind of incompleteness of the Greek vision, that it sublimates, but it does not destroy recrimination and guilt. So I'm going to read now a passage that I've read before on the show from a novel called The Magic Mountain. It's a 1924 novel by Thomas Mann. The main character, Hans Castorp, is having a dream here. And it's a dream in which he sees an idyllic sort of Hellenic civilization, but then he enters more deeply into the center of it and sees something horrifying. So Hans Castorp mounted the high steps and gained the grove of columns. It was very deep. He moved in it as among the trunks in a forest of beeches by the pale northern sea. He purposely avoided the center, yet for all that slanted back again, and presently stood before a group of statuary, two female figures carved in stone on a high base, mother and daughter it seemed, one of them sitting, older than the other, more dignified, right goddess-like and mild, yet with morning brows above the lightless empty eye sockets, clad in a flowing tunic and a mantle of many folds, her matronly brow with its waves of hair covered with a veil. The other figure stood in the protecting embrace of the first, with round, youthful face, and arms and hands wound and hidden in the folds of the mantle. Hans Castorp stood looking at the group, and from some dark cause his leaden heart grew heavier still and more oppressed with its weight of dread and anguish. This is would characterize this as very German, kind of inheritance of high German romanticism, that these visions of classical antiquity are haunted by a certain sense of anguish and horror. Scarcely daring to venture, but following an inner compulsion, he passed behind the statuary and through the double row of columns beyond. The bronze door of the sanctuary stood open, and the poor soul's knees all but gave way beneath him at the sight within. Two gray old women, witch-like, with hanging breasts and dugs of finger length, were busy there between flaming braziers most horribly. They were dismembering a child. In the dreadful silence, they tore it apart with their bare hands. Hans Castorp saw the bright hair blood-smeared and cracked the tender bones between their jaws. Their dreadful lips dripped blood. An icy coldness held him. He would have covered his eyes and fled, but could not. They, at their gory business, had already seen him. They shook their reeking fists and uttered curses, soundlessly, most vilely, with the last obscenity, and in the dialect of Hans Castorp's native Hamburg. It made him sick, sick as never before. This is the nightmare, the bad dream, the hideous anguish that haunts us, right? Even in the height of Western civilization, right? Even in this beautiful grove full of sort of idyllic, Greek mythological and cultural figures, we have this sense that somewhere lurking in the ground, right, the ancient furies weight. And that the cost, right, the cost of our putting these things to rest is essentially to live with them haunting us in the background. And that, there is something lost, right, something given up when we give up recrimination. And that is the satisfaction, right, of tearing each other apart. And this is, the reality of our brokenness, which must be put aside, but which always haunts us, right? I'm going to read another passage before I talk about why this tells us that we need Christianity, right? This is why, what I'm building towards, the reason why. People sometimes ask me all the time, right? Why does Christ have to die on the cross, right? I'm building toward the reason why that is. It's contained, the seeds of it are contained in the Oresteia, and the implications of that are here in the Magic Mountain, and then in this story, 1973 short story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. This is by Ursula K. Le Guin. She tells this story about this beautiful, perfect civilization, a utopia. She says, and then after describing in detail how wonderful this place Omelas is, she says, "Do you believe? Do you accept the festival, the city, the joy? No? Then let me describe one more thing. In a basement under one of the beautiful public buildings of Omelas, or perhaps in the cellar of one of its spacious private homes, there is a room. It has one locked door and no window. A little light seeps in dustily between the cracks in the boards, second-hand from a cobwebbed window somewhere across the cellar. In one corner of the little room, a couple of mops with stiff, clotted, foul-smelling heads stand near a rusty bucket. The floor is dirt, a little damp to the touch, as cellar dirt usually is. The room is about 3 paces long and 2 wide, a mere broom closet or disused tool room. In the room, a child is sitting. It could be a boy or a girl. It looks about 6, but actually is nearly 10. It is feeble-minded. Perhaps it was born defective, or perhaps it has become imbecile through fear, malnutrition, and neglect. It picks its nose and occasionally fumbles vaguely with its toes or genitals as it sits hunched in the corner farthest from the bucket and the 2 mops. It is afraid of the mops. It finds them horrible. It shuts its eyes, but it knows the mops are still standing there, and the door is locked, and nobody will come. The door is always locked, and nobody ever comes, except that sometimes the child has no understanding of time or interval. Sometimes the door rattles terribly and opens, and a person or several people are there. One of them may come in and kick the child to make it stand up. The others never come close, but peer in at it with frightened, disgusted eyes. The food bowl and the water jug are hastily filled. The door is locked. The eyes disappear. The people at the door never say anything, but the child, who has not always lived in the tool room and can remember sunlight and its mother's voice, sometimes speaks. "I will be good," it says. "Please let me out. I will be good." They all know it is there, all the people of Omelas. Some of them have come to see it, others are content merely to know it is there. They all know it has to be there. Some of them understand why and some do not, but they all understand that their happiness, the beauty of the city, the tenderness of their friendships, the health of their children, the wisdom of their scholars, the skill of their makers, even the abundance of their harvest and the kindly weathers of their skies depend wholly on this child's abominable misery. This is the intuition, right, that we have had since the beginning, that in order for justice to be done, somebody has to suffer. Somebody has to take on the suffering that we remove from ourselves by putting an end to blood guilt. Now, that is heavy and dark stuff, right? But it's what Lincoln said about our casualties in the Civil War. I've talked about this before. And the question is, right, how do we put an end to that? If we put an end to blood guilt and recrimination by establishing civilization, by establishing justice, how do we put an end to the suffering that is still left over, this kind of residual suffering, this residual grief, recrimination, anguish? And the answer, my friends, I am afraid to tell you, is only forgiveness. And forgiveness is not fair. This is something that we get wrong all the time, right? Having to forgive and having to let go of blood guilt and of the recrimination and the loss that comes with being born into history, which, by the way, is not limited to racial stuff. We have gotten obsessed with race, right? We have gotten so head up with our racial history and our racial past that we forget that everybody is born into a history that contains injustice in it. Black, white, brown, whatever. I don't care. You are born into a world that is not fair, and forgiving and making peace with the unfairness of that history isn't fair either, but it's the only way to live. And so this idea, right, that forgiveness is the suffering that we must accomplish, must accept in order to live and grow and have civilization, that is the idea that is perfectly crystallized on the cross. That is why our epitome of forgiveness is a man brutally murdered for no reason, right? That is what the cross is, right? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. It's a terrible, anguished thing to have to let go, but afterward comes resurrection. And if you don't believe me, I'm going to read to you now the most powerful speech of the 21st century thus far. On September 6, 2018, Amber Geiger, who was an off-duty Dallas police officer, entered the home of Botham Jean and fatally shot him. Geiger said that she thought it was her own home, and this man's life was lost. Now, this is a hideous tragedy, a devastating anguish, and speaking to you about it, I can only begin to imagine what it would be like to approach that kind of anguish, to lose a son, a brother for no reason, right? And even getting close to it, it's like the glow of the sorrow affects you, right? You can start to feel yourself choke up even without having ever experienced anything like that. But if that were the case, right, it is impossible not to imagine wanting revenge. It's impossible. You can't get close to that without feeling not only anguish, right, but a certain rage, fury, right? What happened next? Brant Jean, Botham Jean's brother, gave a speech in the courtroom. And the speech kind of went viral, although a lot of us have forgotten about it now. I'm going to read Brant Jean's speech. He said, "If you are truly sorry, I can speak for myself. I forgive. And I know if you go to God and ask him, he will forgive you. And I don't think anyone can say it. Again, I'm speaking for myself, but I love you just like anyone else. And I'm not going to say I hope you rot and die just like my brother did, but I presently want the best for you. And I wasn't going to ever say this in front of my family or anyone, but I don't even want you to go to jail. I want the best for you because I know that's exactly what Botham would want you to do. And the best would be to give your life to Christ. I'm not going to say anything else. I think giving your life to Christ would be the best thing that Botham would want you to do. Again, I love you as a person and I don't wish anything bad on you. I don't know if this is possible, but can I give her a hug?" And then they hugged, they embraced. Here's the thing about this. Nobody could have expected that of Brant Jean. Nobody could have demanded it of him. It was not his obligation. He had every right to simply want recrimination, to want revenge. But if you tell me that you can't hear the voice of God speaking when Brant Jean speaks, then I don't know what to say to you. And so the question is not, what are you owed? The question is not, how can you tally up the score just right so that the wrongs of history are set right? The question is, what does it mean for you to live and have life in abundance? And I know that the key to that is a kind of forgiveness that hurts. And I know that it hurts more for some people than for other people. And I know that that's not fair. I'm not here to make it fair or to resolve that for you. I'm just here to tell you where life is. And life is with forgiveness, and forgiveness is on the cross. I hope you've enjoyed this series on the Oresteia, recrimination, blood, guilt, and mercy. Hey, this is your very last chance to get a Lifting is Infrastructure t-shirt. I've been saying since the beginning that these are limited time only. Once they're gone, and they are personally ripped by me, so you can look like a Chad or a Chadette at the gym. Go to youngheretics.com/shop right now to get yours, if there are even still any available. Go check it out. One more time, it's youngheretics.com/shop. I've been seeing people wearing these all over, taking selfies. You look great. And this is the last chance that you have to get one. youngheretics.com/shop for your Lifting is Infrastructure personally ripped gym shirt. Okay. Mailbag questions come to me on Locals, which is a community that exists away from big tech. It's run by my pal, Dave Rubin. Dave is one of the foremost fighters against tech censorship and tech tyranny, and he's built this platform so that nobody owns the relationship between you and me. So if you want to become a VIP on Locals, I really invite you and recommend it. It's youngheretics.com/locals, $7 a month or $56 for the whole year. It's a great way to support the show and go deeper into the questions that we raise here. There have been a number of questions from VIPs for the mailbag lately about what is art. And so over the next couple weeks, I'm going to start addressing some of these questions because it is a thorny and long attested question, and I'd like to give you some tools for answering it. So here's a question from Shani. Dadaists challenged conventions and gave birth to the idea that anything can be art, as long as you are expressing a concept, whilst they did not consider themselves artists. By challenging and changing the definition of art, their work became art. It seems to me that there is a contrast between artworks of the tradition pre-Dada and those post-Dada, and that the dividing difference between the two is in their definitions of art. I am not convinced that anything can be art. A creator may call their work art, or a curator may place something in a gallery and deem it art, but that doesn't make it so. Is there an objective standard and definition of art, and if so, could you please outline it? Yeah, okay, well, first of all, of course you can't just call anything art. I mean, this was a movement not just the Dadaists, but found art, right? Marcel Duchamp, who put a urinal in a gallery and called that art, right? It's called Fountain. You can look it up. There's all sorts of, craziness about this. But look, like, I couldn't eat a block of wood and call it food, right? We use words because they refer to things that exist in the world. If we don't use them to refer to some things and not others, then they become useless, as we have seen in countless different ways over the past several years. So that having been said, right, art is something which has fuzziness around the edges. A lot of things have fuzziness around the edges, right? Think about the difference between a tree and a bush. Trees are obviously a thing. Bushes are obviously a thing. You can't just call a tree a bush and make it a bush. But when you get to like really small trees or really big bushes, there's like fuzziness, right? One of the things that our culture presently does is it uses the fuzziness around the edges to convince us that there's no such thing as the concept and that the word is useless, right? So you'll say like, oh, intersex people exist, or feminine men exist, and therefore masculinity and gender, right? All of those things are just nonsense, right? As if, 99.9% of people didn't fall roughly into these two categories, right? That's nonsense. Everybody has always known that there's fuzziness around the edges. It shouldn't actually hamper our efforts to make good definitions. And a good definition is one that gets at what Aristotle would have called the idion, that is the essential properties, not just things that only art has or does, but things that make art art. And Aristotle actually had a definition of poetry, poetike, which has spoken throughout history to what art more generally is. He said that the poetike is any mimesis, that is any imitation or recreation, reproduction of something for poetry in the medium of logos, rhythmos, and harmonia, that is language, harmony, and rhythm. Not all art uses those three media, right? But there are other media that you can use too, like color, for example, and then you're doing a painting, or shape, and then you're doing sculpture. But as long as you are reproducing, recreating in some new mode or form an experience, a human reality, because the other thing that Aristotle says is that what tragedy represents is men in action, right? And there's something essential to that too, right? That we are in the business of reproducing human existence and experience. I'm going to read to you actually something that I wrote, so forgive me, but this is a piece called An Art That Offers Choices. And it's a part of an exchange that I had on Law and Liberty. You can find it on lawliberty.org. And I wrote this piece, which is about how I think video games are art. I think video games qualify as art. And then there was a response, somebody who disagreed with me, and then I responded to that response. It was a useful exchange. Here's the paragraph in which I think I kind of say what I believe is right? There is a word for something which uses color, light, sound, and language to convey what it is like to live a human life. We call that art. It is a structured creation that expresses emotions and experiences which cannot be expressed in any other way. The objects of imitation are men in action, wrote Aristotle in his Poetics. Events and the people who make them happen are the great subject of that elaborately symbolic communication called mimesis. That paragraph is the best attempt that I can make to summarize for you what I believe to be the right definition of art. What we are obviously talking about. Why do we talk about poetry and sculpture and painting and all these other things in one breath with one word that we call art? Well, I think it's because we have a sense that they all do this. They may do other things. For example, and this is something that we got into in the exchange, right? A hymn is not just art, it is also worship. And many of the great musical forms emerged out of religious worship. But that doesn't mean that it's not also art, right? Something can be two things at once. Something can be, you can use something as a paperweight, and you can use that paperweight at the same time as a blunt instrument to beat somebody to death, right? The question is, why do I call it a paperweight in one instance? Why do I call it a blunt instrument in another? Well, it's because of the purpose I'm using it for, right? This is something Aristotle would have called this the ergon, the essential activity of a thing. The essential activity of art is to represent the human experience using these various sensory media. And that is helpful because it lets us look at new things like video games and say, as I argue in this piece, that in fact they do that and therefore they are art. Or it lets us look at other things, other new things like Zoom, for example, the program Zoom, and say that's not art. It does something else. It enables communication and human connection. So a perfectly noble, good thing. It's not art. That's the definition, and definitions are useful because they help you to see when new things come into the world, how they fit into your pre-existing structure of that world. If they don't help you to do that, you need to revise them. And I would argue that calling anything art doesn't help you to do that at all, whereas the mimesis definition does. There are other answers to this question. That is mine. Thank you for asking it. Okay, that's it for me. I hope you have enjoyed this 3-part series on the Oresteia. If you like this show, you will love the Claremont Institute, where I work. We do, I think, really important work for the recovery of the American idea. You can find us at claremont.org, claremontreviewofbooks.com, and americanmind.org. We publish a bunch of different stuff. American Mind is online. Claremont Review of Books is online and in paper. And if you'd like to support us, go to claremont.org/donate. Let them know when you do that you heard about Claremont through Young Heretics. That's it for me. I will see you next week for more truth, beauty, and the stuff that matters.